I think that is fulfilled. I am still concerned about Miami, but I'm more concerned about Haiti. Very much more concerned in this coming season. This may be one of the 12 catastrophes of 2011. Now, to your other issue about
earthquakes.
The Pacific Rim has gone through a very interesting process where, starting with Chile, going over to Christchurch, New Zealand, on the other corner of the great rim of volcanic seismic activity that rings the Pacific Ocean, it has now moved up to Sendai and Japan with the great tsunami and earthquake. We've had a couple superquakes in the last few years, quite an amazing high active period that I haven't seen since the...
Oh, you there? I think we've lost John.
Yeah, here I am.
There you are. Okay, good.
Yes. So the Chilean quake, we haven't seen this kind of activity since the 1960s. So early 1960s with the Alaska quake and the Chilean quake. My concern, starting in 2010 and 11, has been that now it's the turn of the northeastern or American coastline section of the Pacific Ring of Fire to have some major seismic or volcanic events. My concern is, of course, that there's, and you can read it in my website, there's an amazing synchronicity between full moons or first quarter square moons to the greatest earthquakes of the last few centuries. And it's too detailed to go into now, but it's amazing how they all seem to hit like that. That means that when you have certain astrological effects that are happening right now with the next full moon in this month in May, that's a heightened period of earthquake activity. However, I must say, and since many of my readers are asking about Comet Elenin, it is very interesting to see that every time the comet, as it's approaching Earth and the solar system, lines up with the sun and Earth, on that day there has been that large 8.8 Chilean earthquake in early 2010, the Christchurch, the first of the two temblors that hit Christchurch. That was another time it lined up. And the third was exactly on the day of the great earthquake tsunami in Honshu Island of March. There are two more lineups coming up in September of this year and November of this year. These are times to be extra watchful for seismic activity on the Pacific coast. And since I live on the Pacific coast, in the Pacific Northwest, north of Seattle, I'm watching for this here too, because I think this region will probably get between a 5 and 6 point magnitude earthquake in this year. And I am concerned that San Francisco and especially Los Angeles and San Diego are going to be vulnerable to a major seismic event also, if not in May, then perhaps in September or November.
You may be right. I think it's overdue. Geologist Jim Birkeland, John, also feels, much like you, that these regions could get hit in a very big way.
So Jim is very accurate, and one of the reasons why is that he thinks out of the box. He looks at more than just, earthquake predictions a lot like being a weatherman. You have your science, but you also have to use your intuition. And certain things tell you, for instance, I predict a time where we will be able to calculate exactly when earthquakes are happening when we start creating the instruments that can read the electromagnetic changes that actually have been responsible for some UFO sightings just before earthquakes. It's actually some kind of energy release that sometimes happens in the earth before the quakes. My friend of mine who's an avid listener to Coast-to-Coast-am, Pari Varto, she was in the Northridge quake in 1994, and she remembered when it started, she looked out her window and actually saw what looked like these bubbles of light coming out of the street as everything was rocking and rolling. And there is a phenomenon actually explained as some kind of energy release that happens in quakes.
That's right. John, stay with us. We're going to come back and take final phone calls with you in just a moment. John's website, HogueProphecy.com. Let me spell it for you. Hogue, prophecy.com, linked up at coast-to-coast-am.com, as we're talking about his predictions for the days and years ahead, right here on Coast to Coast AM. And again, he has ebooks that you can get on his website. I'm George Norrie. We'll be right back on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back. Hey, John, before we take final calls, let's talk a little bit more about this comet and the disasters that somehow seem to chase it, or it chases, as it comes around 2012. Do you think the Mayans knew something, or is this all speculation?
Well, I think one of the problems why NASA and others are not able to handle this is that astrologers are probably dancing with glee in a way that is an indication that there is something beyond mere gravity. I mean, scientists will say the gravity and the electromagnetics and the pulls of something as small as Comet Elenin, and it is a comet. It's not Nibiru. It's not a brown star. Right. One has to check the facts rather than the imagination on this. It is a comet. And it's not going to come any way close to us, even when it makes its closest pass. But as an astrologer and a prophecy scholar, I've also noticed where other heavenly bodies seem to be in certain positions, often 90 degrees to Earth, like Uranus and Mars. And when that happens, often like clockwork, there are seismic events. There are things that happen. So what I'm simply saying, I'm not saying astrologers are jumping with glee. That's probably the wrong term to say, but it's more like it is a telling evidence that we do not yet know how to measure that shows that maybe there's another force that we haven't seen yet that does influence our seismic events. This comet lines up with the sun 3 times. And we've had 3 major seismic events on the days this happens. That's a little more than a coincidence. And, when is it going to be more than a coincidence if something happens in September, if something happens in November? It'd be 5 coincidences. Now, there is Paul the octopus, that the famous octopus that could predict the World Cup. And he was pretty amazing. And I did a whole article at HogueProphecy.com about him, a rather funny one. And it could very well be that it can be explained that he liked the colors of Spain, because octopi can see colors, more in the flags that were in his tank with the little mollusks that he would grab and eat. And it could have been because he likes yellow and red, because most of the people he picked had more yellow and red in their flags. So there could be a scientific explanation to a octopus that can make a dozen accurate predictions about, which is almost impossible. And there must be maybe some other attraction or something that we can't quite see in a comet that passes and lines up with us.
All right, John. Let's go next to David in Scottsdale, Arizona, west of the Rockies. Hi, David.
Good morning, George and John. You don't know how much I relish this. 7 years to get through, and George and John, I don't know how long John's been listening, but I've been listening since Richard C. Hoagland and Art Bell were discussing a weather control station in Alaska to be used for war purposes one day. And the second thing, I've never heard anybody in all that time ever discuss the fact that the U.S. and 4 other countries around the world have been exploding underground atomic weapons as far as 16 miles down below the earth. And that was from the Second World War on for us. I don't know any other countries joined in, but how do you think, sir, that those 2 things might be affecting our weather today?
I don't think they're affecting the weather. I know that I have heard and studied that in the depths of the Cold War, there were certainly people digging very deep chambers and lighting off atomic weapons. The ones that I know of were in the Shoshone regions of Nevada, and they were also doing in the Soviet Union. But I will say this, that back in 1990 when I wrote the Millennium Book of Prophecy, which looked at 777 predictions, half of them doomsday arguments, half of them contradicting them as bloomsday or golden age arguments. I did have a chapter in there where I said, World War III has already been inflicted on the fourth world peoples. It's been inflicted on the tribal people of the Bikini Islands. It's been inflicted on the Shoshone and the Native American people of the West, and it was in their prophecies that such things would happen, the Hopi and their gourd of ashes, that we have actually dropped like 1,600 bombs on lands that were often native lands of the fourth world, and we've done it in the oceans. And then after that stopped in the 60s, we started blowing them up deep down inside the same lands. And if you count it, we've already had that. Some Native Americans will tell you we've already had the Third World War, and it was inflicted as a test on their lands. So it has an effect. All that atmospheric blasting has an effect. And what extent it has an effect, I don't know. So I'd say there's some effect.
All right, let's go to Howard in Las Vegas. Howard, welcome to the program. You're up with us.
It's Howard Beale here. As your screener said, I wanted to challenge the John there.
Sure.
I heard him way back in the Wayback Machine, and his prophecies were like spot on. John, this is just a challenge because there's a small group of people that they're afraid to call in, but I have to do it for them. So anyway, but your prophecies were spot on. Little worried about you now. I'm back in the Laura Lee days, and but yeah. So then you've but anyway. So you've become. I'll just say it. It seems like you're corporate. Maybe you're doing something else. You're afraid to tell them the real story. It's okay. And
well, you're saying I'm corporate?
Have you gone corporate on us, Hogue?
Boy, I think I'm going to start having to put